as I've already told you, the title of my talk today is Korean Performance Through the Inter-Asia Lens, an introduction. For some of you, the concept of Inter-Asia may already be familiar, for others may be not. And so one of the aims of this talk is to introduce you to the term Inter-Asia and how useful that might be to understand Korean performance a little bit differently than we've been introduced to. But first, I'm going to show you a short video.
예, 지금 듣고 계신 노래, 홍콩에서 울려 퍼진 노래입니다. 우리 민주화 과정에서 끊임없이 불렸던 이 노래. 임을 위한 행진곡은 사실 몇 년 전까지만 해도 5.18 기념식에서조차 재창이냐 합창이냐를 두고 논란이 일기도 했었죠. 그런데 멀리 홍콩 시민들이 되레 한 마음으로 불렀습니다. 그들은 이 노래를 어떻게 알았을까요? 권근영 기자가 그 의미를 짚어드립니다.
홍콩 차터가든에서 열린 어머니 집회에선 귀에 익은 멜로디가 들렸습니다. 기타를 연주하며 노래한 여성은 한국의 광주 민주화 운동을 대표하는 노래라고 소개했습니다.
咁如果大家有睇過三套韓劇《逆權大狀》《逆權司機》同埋《1987》嘅話咧，我諗你好清楚我喺度講緊啲乜嘢。咁喺呢個關州事件裏邊。
노래는 37년 전 홍콩.
Okay, so the short video that you saw was from Hong Kong. So in the summer of 2019, Hong Kong, the former British colony and a special administrative region of the People's Republic of China, saw the beginning of what would become months-long anti-government protests calling for universal suffrage, protection of the basic law, and political freedom. So what you just saw in the video was a Hong Kong singer performing the song titled March for the Beloved, or Ryon Yoon, a Korean song composed in 1981 to mourn the loss of the victims of Gwangju People's Uprising. The song was performed in front of a large group of Hong Kong protesters in Chatter Garden, which is one of the largest and the most major sites of a gathering on the Hong Kong island. A similar case was observed in the Thai democratization movement in 2020, where young protesters staged K-pop choreography as part of the protest rallies or mobilized K-pop fans to make donations to the political movement. So instances like these, along with cases like Asian TikTok content creators' parodies of K-drama and films, or restaging of K-pop choreographies on YouTube by Asian dance crews, have prompted the resurgence of academic interests in the concept of Inter-Asia, especially in research on performance, visual art, and pop culture. Is this phenomenon simply an outcome of a global circulation of Korean pop culture, or can this be read more analytically as part of an Inter-Asia citation of cultures, which points to acts of Asians using other Asian cultures as a major point of reference, instead of the previous hegemonic influences of Euro-American cultures or American pop cultures, to be more precise? How does our understanding of Korean performance change if we read it through the Inter-Asia lens? And how does this move allow us to reposition our thinking in relations to Asia, as opposed to the dichotomy of Korean culture versus the West? This talk is an introduction to the concept of Inter-Asia, or ASE, which may not necessarily be familiar to many students within the Korean studies field, I assume. And so my talk today proposes to consider Korean performance by way of Inter-Asia thinking, and how we might see the practices and impact related to Korean performance differently after we engage with the concept of Inter-Asia today. I will first walk you through how Inter-Asia as a concept and a frame emerged in the specific temporal and spatial context of the post-Cold War Asia and its usefulness in cultural and performance studies. I will be specifically talking about my recent co-edited volume on dance and Inter-Asia, where my co-editor, Emily Wilcox, and I sought to center performance in Inter-Asia research, as well as critique the concept of Asian dance formed in relations to the US-centric view of the world. Next, I will briefly discuss two case studies from my research, which illustrate the inter-Asia citations of Korean performances in Dhaka, Bangladesh, and in Hong Kong. What I hope you can take away from this talk is the ways in which we can dislodge K-culture or K-performance, if you will, from its nationalist coordinate, and at the same time critique the Euro-American centric mainstream narrative around Korean culture or K-culture as successful when consumed and upheld by the Western audience members. Inter-Asia, or AJE, as we call it in South Korea, was first imagined as an intellectual movement which imagines the possibilities of different kinds of solidarities and exchange through the reconsideration of Asia as a region, as well as a site of knowledge production. This was in response to a critique of post-World War II and Cold War constructions of Asia, specifically through the Euro-American knowledge production in area studies in higher education. This was also in recognition, partly through a critical inquiry about Asia as a geopolitical location and concept of the so-called Asian century. I don't know if you've ever heard of this term, but this term was coined as a reaction first to the emergence of post-industrial high-growth economies in South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong, and later, in recent years, to the dominance of Chinese and Indian economic power in the region. Inter-Asia, which has been specifically instituted through departments of cultural studies as well as adjacent fields, calls our attention to the everyday cultural practices and consumer cultures, both activated and obscured by such an economic transition, specifically happening across and within Asia. Various scholars have indeed paid attention to this long-term phenomenon, although they're not always coming from the same fields or part of the same cohort. Anthropologist Ai Wa-ong and sociologist Cho Beng-hwat have called it interreferencing, observing the emerging patterns in which Asian locations, especially the metropolitan cities, have begun to refer to Asian cities as their models rather than European or American cities. So think of, instead of calling Busan a Napoli of South Korea, you're now beginning to see Busan as referring itself to Hong Kong. We may also expand this to, so here's an example. So Incheon, both Incheon and Busan, two port cities actually have recently begun to imagine themselves as the new Hong Kong or new Hong Kong City, in the hopes of kind of positioning themselves as the new financial hub or new industrial hub within the region as Hong Kong is beginning to be absorbed into China. And so you're kind of seeing the changes here. We may also expand this to aesthetic and cultural references, which are the focal point of my interest in this talk. So for instance, Korean advertisements and entertainment shows constantly evoking Hong Kong movie star Cha Yun-fat in his iconic scenes in John Woo's A Better Tomorrow. I don't know for students if you're too young to remember what A Better Tomorrow is, but from the 1980s Hong Kong movie, Cha Yun-fat's iconic kind of scene that you see on the left side is constantly parodied in Korean entertainment shows or advertisements. Or there's also a recent resurgence of interest in the bubble economy era urban jazz and dance song styles from Japan, which is called city pop in the South Korean popular music scene. Other scholars have used different terms to indicate inter-Asia exchange and solidarities. I've already talked about Ai Wa-ong and Cho Beng-hwat's interreferencing, right? Other scholars like Taiwanese cultural theorist Chen Guangxin, who use the term method to point to Asia as a site of knowledge production following the 1960s Japanese thinker Takeuchi Yoshimi. Or Indian feminist and cultural theorist Tejaswini Niranjana proposed to reclaim, or in her word, reworld the third world from its negative connotation to dismantle elite nationalism and work towards the political possibility of the non-aligned movement. South Korean scholars like Kim Soo-young and Tae Hae-suk have also used the terms Trans-Asia and tricontinental thinking, respectively, to illustrate the transnational relations that define Korea and Asia beyond nation-based frames. So informed by this context, my co-edited volume was born out of a necessity to recognize two aspects of the existing lacuna. First, Asian dance as a category and a genre has been formed and understood as a post-World War construct, formed and defined as a cultural opposition to Euro-American modern and contemporary dance. So for instance, if you Google Asian dance, and this is kind of a crude example, but still valid in my opinion, is when you think of Asian dance or when you sort of hear the term Asian dance, you don't necessarily think of modern or abstract movements. You always already kind of imagine the traditional and folk. And part of it is very much a construct, imagined construct of a post-World War to American, Euro-American imagination. Second, performance was not necessarily centrally placed in the debates around inter-Asia, even as the long history of performance practices across different Asian cultures show that practitioners have long been referencing other Asian aesthetics as their primary sources. So by applying these imperatives, the understanding of inter-Asia as well as Asian performance changes towards a deeply contextual and comparative approach. So simply put, from this perspective, Korean performance must be and will be understood in relations to other Asian cultures, with which we ask, how is assumed Koreanness in Korean performance transformed and gets appropriated in the local Asian contexts? What kind of impact is being made when Korean performance, against its intended nationalist and Koreanizing influence, is practiced to make sense of the local politics and priorities in other parts of Asia? The case studies published in this volume illustrate how these questions could be addressed by showing, for instance, Hong Kongers practicing Indian dance or South Pacific Indonesia Australia dance networks, and the South-South connection between Taiwanese and Thai dancers. These show how dances are created not just side by side, but by referring to one another, thereby seeking to create new forms and aesthetic languages. My two case studies further highlight how these are done in a ground level everyday discourse. The first case study is the 2012 viral sensation of K-pop song Gangnam Style and its flash mob performance in Dhaka, Bangladesh, the article about which you've already read, I hope. The other case study is a tradition-based Korean contemporary dance performed in the 1986 Hong Kong Festival of Asian Art, part of which I also presented last year. It's already last year. Last year at Copenhagen University during the Korean Studies Conference. So together, these case studies illustrate, despite the nationalist framework, Korean performance's appropriation deconstructs the local presupposition about what Koreanness is supposed to look like, and in turn opens up a space for debate around what an appropriate national and cultural identity is. So in this case study about Gangnam Style in Dhaka, I sought to understand Gangnam Style, the 2012 viral sensation of the song by Korean pop artist Psy, as an unforeseen force that activated decoloniality and the third world concept beyond the usual narrative about how successful Gangnam Style was in the American Billboard chart, and whether Psy's success in the US hinged upon American racial politics that consumed Psy's body as a comical agent. Instead, I looked at a case of a flash mob performance by a group of Bangladeshi youth who gathered in the Kawan Bazaar to perform their version of choreography to the viral sensation of Gangnam Style. Let's take a quick look at the video.
오빤 강남스타일 강남스타일 낮에는 따사로운 인간적인 여자 커피 한 잔에 여유를 아는 품격 있는 여자 밤이 오면 심장이 뜨거워지는 여자 그런 반전 있는 여자 너는 선호해 낮에는 너만큼 따사로운 그런 선호해 커피 식기도 전에 원샷 때리는 선호해 밤이 오면 심장이 터져버리는 선호해 그런 선호해 아름다워 사랑스러워 그래 너 그래 바로 너 아름다워 사랑스러워 그래 너 그래 바로 너 지금부터 갈 때까지 가볼까 오빤 강남스타일 강남스타일 오빤 강남스타일 강남스타일 오빤 강남스타일 에이 섹시 레이디 오빤 강남스타일 에이 섹시 정숙해 보이지만 볼 땐 노는 여자 이때
did not intend this performance to be political at all. It nevertheless ignited heated debates about what and who gets to represent Bangladeshi cultural practices online, and whether this was done by privileged and entitled youth who had access to the public space where assemblies like flash mobs were strictly prohibited and were targets of police surveillance. So in this, I use the concept of refraction to understand how even though the essence of the content remains more or less the same, like the lyrics or the horse dance bit, they transform into a different cultural meaning. Drawing from the physics term, refraction is considered a mode of thinking about inter-Asian cultural circulations, where just like when a light or energy wave is redirected upon entering a different medium or by a difference of speed, performance changes its direction through its inter-Asia relations. The reason why this case is unique is that the debate among the online users, as well as the flash mob participants, questioned whether K-pop songs like Gangnam Style were Western-centric or part of Asia, whether it's something invasive or imperializing, or something to be modeled after as part of an Asian culture. Psy's body is read as racialized Asian in an American context, but it's also read simultaneously as a Westernized body in the Bangladeshi context. So this question invites a critical reading of what is at stake differently than other Gangnam Style flash mobs in the US, for instance, that have been the primary materials for analysis for the global viral sensation of Gangnam Style. The participants of the flash mob had gathered prior to the actual event online to discuss their event very briefly and did a couple of rehearsals before the actual event. So even though this was the first flash mob in the streets of Dhaka, the participants had not done a very meticulous job of planning and choreographing, as you could see from the video. So the priority was not to get caught while having fun out of the experiences. The organizers denied in various interviews that they did this as not a political comment, but rather because they just liked Psy. What this means is that their blatant pursuit of fun actually serves to counteract a presupposed imperative that the geopolitical minor locations, such as Dhaka in Bangladesh, is either always already peripheral to global consumption practices or must always be positioned to perform as a post-colonial commentator and victims of the empire's consumption of pop culture. The pursuit of pleasure by performing is a result of the resistance to the prescriptive good minority history of culture. And so the seeming apolitical quality of Karan Bazaar flash mob becomes actually political in the sense that it rehearses what different stake is at by performing the unruly minor, which led to a renewed discussion around the contentious nature of Bangladeshi identity. The second case study I discussed that is illustrative of the Inter-Asia referencing is the 1986 performance of a Korean dance company called Sungkonghoe in Hong Kong. In this late Cold War period where both South Korea and Hong Kong were experiencing an intense transitive moment, Hong Kong had just begun its process of being returned to the People's Republic of China following the Sino-British Joint Declaration in 1984. And for those of you who can't really identify who these people are, Deng Xiaoping on the left and the late Queen Elizabeth II on the right. South Korea had also organized its first large-scale international sports event, Asian Game, in the fall that year, during which the state ordered an intense crackdown on democratization activists and political dissidents. These political transitions in each location, Hong Kong and South Korea, prompted questions about what is Korean as well as Hong Kong culture. This context is relevant to our understanding of how the performance of Changmuhoe also prompted a discussion in Hong Kong around what is Hong Kong dance and what is its methodology, especially as Hong Kong artists and audiences saw Hong Kong being absorbed back into China. The performance of Changmuhoe, which was founded in 1973, was significant because it was the first dance company to have staged an original choreography than other dance companies from South Korea that had performed in Hong Kong, which performed a very kind of strict traditional repertoire. Whether the audience or the dance critics liked it or not, the performance was not what they had expected to see from Korean dance, which implies the original choreography of the dance company's artistic director, Kim Mae-ja, was completely unexpected than the traditional dances that they used to see. Her choreography had been half jokingly, half seriously called a crazy dance, 지랄춤. For her mentors and senior dance artists did not understand nor 100% approve at first of Kim Mae-ja's work, which incorporated both traditional elements and contemporary abstract dance movements. Her dance was called crazy by classically trained traditional dancers for its seemingly originless and nationless movements, but it was also embraced by dance critics as a cross movement of traditional and contemporary, showing a possibility to forge a new method of Korean and broadly Asian dance. This spoke to Hong Kong dance critics as well, who saw it as a mix of an expression of ethnic origin on the one hand and the representation of day-to-day experience on the other, thereby becoming the driving force of Korean dance's future against Korea's preserved pure dance tradition. Changmuhoe's performance exemplified this characterization of experimentation on Asian dances forming in between pre-colonial traditional elements and westernized abstract contemporary dance vocabularies. What you see in the slide, for example, is Kim Mae-ja's choreographed version at the bottom, right, in the black and white picture, based on the traditional canon of what's called chunengmu, which is part of the royal court dance repertoire. So Kim Mae-ja's dance, the Korean choreographer's dance, titled 벗은 발로, or In Bare Feet, which was renamed from 1985, 땅의 사람, is an adaptation of 춘행무, the royal court dance. This particular piece did not necessarily reproduce the specific movement or stage elements of 춘행무, but rather broke down its structure, like dancing in a limited parameter, into a more abstract concept to explore the interiority of the original 춘행무, which is supposed to be muted in its emotional expression. Let me just play this video really quickly. Already have just skipping. So as you can see in the traditional element, it's very tranquil and the emotion is muted. Whereas in the deconstructed version of this royal court dance, you see Kim Meja actually expressive of emotional qualities, and yet she's also sticking to the structural elements of Chunengmu by, for instance, limiting her dance space into a particular limited parameter. So for instance, okay, so
Surya,
I can come back to the video later if you want.
you?
Yes.
We
Yes.
only hear the music. We don't see a dance.
Okay, maybe the videos are lagging. We can come back to it. I'm just gonna skip
okay.
through. Okay, all right. All right, so I only have 3 minutes left, so I'm gonna kind of quickly whiz through the rest of my talk. So as you can see, you saw a kind of a new form emerging from the interpretation and deconstruction of traditions, right? And so this was kind of interpreted in Hong Kong as future-looking, forward-looking, whereas Hong Kong was also kind of struggling with its identity question as it's being absorbed into China. So even as the future opportunities for foreign investment and neoliberalization of regional market were received optimistically, Hong Kong was actually struggling with its identity question. And even more so for performing arts companies, because even the market was changing, the dance companies in particular in Hong Kong were struggling with the support, right? And so when the Korean dancers who performed in Hong Kong saw rapid transitions and changes in Hong Kong, the dance companies were still kind of catching up with its own questions about methodologies. So Korean dance and watching Korean dance like Kim Meja's actually inspired them and prompted them to ask questions about what is Hong Kong dance or what is Hong Kong methodologies. So the city's government-funded flagship contemporary dance company, for instance, performed a contemporary performance titled Exits and Entrances, right? It kind of echoes this question of what is Hong Kong? Where is Hong Kong entering, right? What is its future? Which embodied Hong Kong in its transitive state with its choreographies directly addressing questions of what is Hong Kong and how can Hong Kong be performed as dance movements against what they saw from the future-looking or forward-looking Korean dance. So Chiang Wai's performance itself had raised an important identity question when it came to Korean culture and the arts, and its visit coincided with Hong Kong as well as South Korea's own political turmoil. So in conclusion, I'm kind of skipping through it, but in conclusion, in this talk, I have sought to introduce you to the concept of Inter-Asia and how Korean performance through the two case studies could be understood differently if we place it in inter-Asian relations, right? First with Bangladesh and the second with Hong Kong. So all performances travel across borders to be sure. However, what the Inter-Asia lens clarifies for us is that the common experiences in colonialism, democratization, Cold War conflicts, and constructing Asian identities against Western-centric understanding of Asia have opened up a new space for distinctive inquiries as Asians respond to the ubiquity of Korean performances across the region. Thank you very much, and I look forward to our discussion that follows.